Good afternoon. It is a real pleasure to be here, except this mic now is hopefully you can still hear me. Can you hear me okay? Usually being heard is not my problem. Real pleasure. I want to thank my friend and colleague, Provost Ivor Griffith, for this invitation and say it's a real honor to be with you today as you work together to think about some of the challenges facing CUNY and its system and many campuses, and what you can do to ensure that access to quality higher education remains viable for a large number of students throughout the city. I was speaking recently with an old friend, Arthur Levine, who is the president of Teachers College. And Arthur is also a graduate of CUNY. He's writing a book. I'm not sure if he will finish it because it's kind of biographical, but it's called something like The Boy in My Bedroom. Now, that sounds a little weird, but it's actually about a boy who now lives in the very bedroom that he grew up in the Bronx. And he's describing how different the world is today than the world was when he was growing up, living in that same apartment and bedroom. And he describes the fact that when he was a boy, growing up as a poor son of immigrants in the Bronx, they knew, he and his peers, that they worked hard, they would have access to a high-quality education that he describes as a superhighway to opportunity, namely CUNY. And he goes on to describe all the distinguished scholars and professionals and artists that have made their way through CUNY and made their mark in the world because of what this education provided. It's a powerful reminder of what I think all of us know, which is the unique role and purpose that public higher education plays in this country, particularly here in this city. As at a time when our nation is becoming even more inequitable with respect to incomes and opportunity, public education, especially higher education, is of critical importance. It's the only way we can ensure that some will have access to middle-class jobs, a better life, upward mobility, the American dream as we've known it. The sad truth is, though, that that is increasingly a diminishing prospect. That is, rather than this superhighway, now I would say it's really a pipeline that is broken and increasingly not working, particularly for those who are most disadvantaged. When Arthur writes about the boy in his bedroom, he writes about the fact that that boy has a higher probability of not graduating from high school than he did. Much less chance of being able to go to college than he did. And it's not because he's not smart. He doesn't work hard like Arthur. He, too, is the child of immigrants. Like Arthur, he's coming into the world at a different time. Coming into the world at a time where opportunities are closing up and where, in the name of higher standards, universities are actually making it more and more difficult for students like that boy to have access. I'll come back to that point about higher standards in a moment. But I do want you to think about this larger question of how we ensure that education is available as a pathway to opportunity. The things, the political scientists like to talk about American exceptionalism, and we'll hear a lot about that in the coming presidential race. Who think that's what really is so important, although I'm not sure they all really understand the concept. But one of the things that really stands the United States apart from other countries, particularly other wealthy nations, is the fact that we were the first to develop a system of public education. Unlike other countries, we developed it not through a mandate from the central or the federal government. We did it through local communities, starting in small towns in Massachusetts and then gradually spreading across the country in a very decentralized, unorchestrated manner. That's the reason why there is no minister or secretary of education with real teeth. They would like to take on some teeth. Really, the power of public education resides in local communities. We have local control, very different from most other countries. Policy gets set by states, not by the federal government for the most part, except in a few other areas. No Child Behind has changed that to a great degree. But that decentralized nature means that we also live with a highly inequitable school system. So that if you trace the evolution and the history of the development of public education in the United States, one of the things you're struck by is that it follows the very uneven, at times ugly, development of civil rights in this country. It's not surprising that the last region in the country to develop public schools is the South. And that was not only public schools that included African Americans, but public schools for anybody. Reconstruction brought public education to the South for black and white. Because as an agrarian society based on slave labor, planters didn't believe it was in their interest to educate either poor white farmers or their slaves. And we know that if you follow the history of public education in this country, you actually will learn the history of civil rights and democracy in this country. Because every advancement, whether it be the Brown decision in '54 or Title IX or disability rights or the rights of the language minorities, every right that we have guaranteeing access to education served as precedent for expanding rights in other sectors. So in many ways, public education, although it's not mentioned in the Constitution, there's no right to a public education in the Constitution, it has become an inalienable right. In fact, the courts have repeatedly ruled that even undocumented children have the right to public education in this country. Amazing, isn't it? Public education, in many ways, is the only entitlement in our Constitution. Because unlike our other rights, the right to bear arms, right to free speech, right to religion, they don't give you anything. They're framed in negative terms, what the government can't do to you. Government can't stop you from speaking if you can, if you have access to a radio station or a newspaper, which actually serves a pretty big limit, doesn't it? Fortunately, the government doesn't go out issuing arms, right? But if you have some arms, in places you're allowed to bear them, right? If you're in Texas, you could probably have a lot of armed folks right here today with us. So our rights are mostly framed in negative terms, preventing the government from taking action against us. Education is different. Education is the one area where the government actually has to provide, to ensure access. That's the reason why even in small towns and poorest communities across the country, there are public schools. And all kinds of children attend, not only the undocumented, the homeless, children who have parents who are incarcerated, all kinds of children end up in our schools. And so our schools are really the social safety net of American society. Surprisingly, they fail at that. They fail because we fund them inequitably. They fail because the schools that serve the neediest children typically get the fewest resources. And not surprisingly, are often overwhelmed by their needs. Are we surprised to find that when you look at the rankings of schools and of districts, that the districts that serve the poorest kids are always at the bottom? Is anybody surprised by that? Is anybody surprised by knowing that there are certain schools that are become what Secretary Duncan calls dropout factories, where you have much higher probability of dropping out than of graduating? Because those schools are always in the neediest communities, serving the neediest children. But in this country, although we provide access to education, we provide nothing else. Nothing else. Many of those kids come to school sick because we don't provide health care. And if some have their way, we'll make sure we don't provide health care. And we don't provide housing. And we don't provide lots of other things that we know kids need in order to be healthy, in order to not only to develop, but also to benefit from education. On one hand, we have this great, important promise of opportunity through public education. It really does set this country apart from other countries. Such a critical part of the American dream, and at times it works. How many of you come from a family here? Either of your parents graduate from college? Raise your hand. Go around the room. For half the people here today. And how many come from a family where neither parent graduated from high school? Look around the room. Still hands. Mine too. Neither of my parents graduated high school. My father hates when I say that. He did get his GED. But now I'm a university professor at NYU. Like all of you, education has served as a pathway of opportunity for us. Now we have to ask ourselves, how many people like us will get this opportunity? To what degree is that dream still alive? And to what degree is CUNY in particular a place where that dream lives? Now, I raise these questions all the time at NYU about our lack of diversity, about our lack of students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And it's a very, very hard battle there because we are the second most expensive university in the country. And we don't provide need-blind admissions. And so if I was given another lecture about the failings of NYU and other private universities, you'd hear me go on at length about the problem. Public universities are different because they have a different mission, different purpose. Public universities were explicitly established to ensure access to people of all backgrounds, regardless of income. And the real question, the real challenge is, what do we do to keep that dream alive? What the data shows is it's dying. That dream is dying. Dying for a long time. In fact, the American dream is in many ways a myth. Not completely. There are still people like us out there who manage somehow to be incredibly resilient, to get through school, to get through college, to find a way to use education to improve themselves. That still happens. But increasingly, those individuals are the exceptions. They're the exceptions. And while we love exceptions, in fact, we have great myths about those exceptions, don't we? The Bill Clinton story, right? From Hope to the White House. We love those stories, but the fact is, those exceptions mean that there are lots and lots of others out there who have the talent and potentially even the ability who don't get the opportunity. Now, of course, as all of us know, the opportunity doesn't begin at college. It begins way before college. The reason why we have a broken pipeline is because we have a broken system. I was looking at the data the other day. Only 19 of 100 students in this state will graduate with either an associate's or a bachelor's degree. 19 out of 100. And when you look at the data even further, you'll find vast sectors of this state have no pipeline at all. I was asking this question of our Vice President of Education Initiatives at SUNY to give us data on where we draw our students. Lo and behold, you can see whole sections of the state where poverty is concentrated, but we get very, very few students. Is that because there's no talent in the South Bronx? Or no talent in Roosevelt? Or no talent in Buffalo? Or no talent in Baker, Queens? Or is that because our school systems aren't in the business of cultivating talent? It's a different way to think about your job, isn't it? I meet so many educators, including, I think, especially professors in higher ed, who will take the position, that my job as a professor is to cover the material. My job is to deliver the goods. And if they can't do it, then they don't belong. And to the degree that that attitude prevails, we will find is lots and lots of young people who may have the potential but simply meet the expectation. These are the professors, the teachers, because you also see that attitude not just at higher ed, you see it in high schools, middle schools, sometimes even in elementary schools. People say, you know, if they come to me motivated, if they come to me ready to learn, if they come to me prepared, then I can do a good job. I told you there was a doctor out there, but he's only good if you're healthy already. You probably say, well, I don't want that doctor. When I get sick, I want the doctor to go with sick people. Because the way we judge doctors and health systems is how much value do they add? Do they make people get better? Do they help them? Somehow in education, we forgot that idea, that we're supposed to add value. We're supposed to make a difference. We're not supposed to blame our students for what they didn't get. There's been a change. And I challenged the of CUNY at a very public event because I heard him talking about the Blackmail Initiative. I was very happy to hear about the Blackmail Initiative. I said the raising of standards at CUNY has actually created the blackmail crisis at CUNY. Because if you raise the bar, but don't have a strategy to how you're going to get people up to that bar, you're going to simply cut them out the picture. I'm all for higher standards. I am against, let me get clear right now, I'm against low standards. I agree with President Bush, George W. I'm against the soft bigotry of low expectations. Now, I'm not sure if he knew what that meant, but I'm against it just like he was. What's the soft bigotry of low expectations? It's those who believe that because of who you are, because of your background, because of where you're from, you're simply not capable. I'm against that, like the president. If you really believe that, then it means we have to really approach this work very differently than we do. Raising standards is the easy part. It's the easy part. If the provost, if my friend Ivelaw said, you know what, I'm going to raise standards here at York for my faculty, health standards. And if your blood pressure is too high, if your cholesterol level is too high, if you're too much overweight, you're out. We can't have unhealthy faculty here. And I'm doing it in your own interest. Because as your provost, I want to ensure that you're healthy. I want to ensure that you're going to live long enough that we're not going to have to spend a lot of money on you for health insurance. This is for you. Now, if he didn't provide you with a personal trainer, and access to the gym, and maybe access to a vegetarian menu, a lot of you would be out of jobs, right? Because setting the bar is not good enough. You don't find a way to help people to get there, you actually set people up for failure when you claim you're doing it for the best of reasons. So we've raised the standards, but we haven't figured out what do we do to get people to meet the standards. And I would say that's created this crisis on our hands, a crisis in opportunity. I don't want to blame CUNY, because I think the blame it's all around. It's in the school system. And I spent a lot of time challenging Mayor Bloomberg, the chancellor, whether it be Klein or Black. I could only challenge her for a little while. And now Dennis Walcott. Here they are, the only strategy they have for helping schools is to shut them down. I said, wow, this is amazing. So you guys have shut down over 100 schools under mayoral control. Now, if the CEO of General Motors said, I'm going to shut down factories, we would say, guess what? We need a new CEO. Because the job of the CEO is not simply to shut things down, it's actually to improve. And I challenged them, I said, if that many schools are failing under your leadership, something is wrong with the leadership. Because your job is to help the schools, not merely to judge the schools. I keep asking them, you say we have mayoral control, for what are you accountable? For what should you be judged? You can't just say your job is to hold everybody else accountable. That's not real accountability. Right? Truman said the buck stops with me. You have the power, you get the responsibility, you also should get the accountability. And which schools do we shut down? The schools serving the neediest students. The schools that we actually deliberately designed to fail. We look at that data. You know, there's a tipping point in a school. If you increase significantly the number of special needs students, the number of English language learners, the number of what they're calling level 1 students, if there are too many in one school, the likelihood that that school will fail is way up. Now, they actually make it worse than that. Then they populate that school with the least experienced teachers. They call that the Urban Teaching Fellows Program. Now, tell me, in what other field is it okay to take the least experienced people and give them the most challenging jobs? We don't do that in any other field. In fact, in most fields, if it's a really challenging job, we've got to get the people who are the most experienced, the most knowledgeable to do the work, because we don't want to set the rookies up. But we set the rookies up, don't we? We put them into the most challenging classrooms, and then we staff them with a brand new principal and say, good luck. We'll keep every year, we'll change the principal, in fact. That works. And it doesn't, does it? Never does. But we pretend. We pretend we're doing so. We pretend we're reforming. My colleague Charles Payne wrote a book called So Much Reform, Why So Little Change? Looks at all the money we've been spending on reform, millions, billions of dollars. New textbooks, new technology, new professional development. Schools still failing. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture? There's a new study out that so much of the reforms that have been invested by the Gates Foundation, the Broad Foundation, have not worked. You know why? Because we pursue gimmicks. We don't really focus on the substance. What's the substance? The substance is always the quality of teaching. Substance is engagement by students, parental involvement, leadership. And if you don't address those things, guess what? Nothing changes. Nothing changes. You know that by now. Did that sound like I came up with something new that you hadn't heard from before? Sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Except as my father likes to say, common sense isn't that common. And especially in education policy, it's often rare. We act as though you can improve schools by pressuring them, by blaming them, by humiliating them. Put them on a list. Let everybody know it's a failing school. Put a letter grade out there. Let everybody know, like the scarlet letter approach to school improvement. They tried that in the state of Florida. The state of Florida put letter grades on schools. You go to an A school all the way down to an F school. Now, I would think that if they put an F on the building, they shouldn't let the children go there. So, already, that school is unfit. If they told you today that this building is condemned, there's asbestos in the air, but I've still say, go ahead, let them go, let them go. You say, this is irresponsible. You knew in advance this place was no good. In Florida and in New York, send kids to F schools. Now, in New York, they said, well, okay, we'll shut them down. They come up, and I went to visit Edison High School in Miami. It was a triple F school. Principal, how do you get to be a triple F? He said, well, you simply fail the state exam 3 years in a row. I said, what happens if you fail again? Well, we will fail again. Because 85% of our kids don't speak English. And they can't pass the state exam. So we will fail again and again and again. He says, and the state says they'll take us over. I said, well, are you worried about being taken over? He said, not at all. So why not? He said, because the state can't take us over. There's too many schools just like us. You know what the crazy thing is? If the state did take us over, do you think they would know what to do? Is there some secret recipe they've been holding back on that they will make available to Edison? What's the record of state takeovers across the country? What's the record right here in New York? Roosevelt has been under state control for what, 20, 25 years now? The state should be, we should sue the state. Because they've been in charge of that mess in Roosevelt. But that's the record across the country. Because we haven't focused on what we know makes a difference. I want to acknowledge here that policy is a problem. The politics are a problem. We've been cutting right now. We have 6,000 teachers in New York City with the possibility of layoffs. Are they serious? They go through with this, do you know what that would mean in terms of class size? I can't believe that Bloomberg, I think this is a bluff, but we'll see soon if he's serious or not. But the politics really do make this work so much more difficult. I'm not here to blame the politicians, although they deserve lots and lots of blame. Because the fact is our students are going to come anyway. and they're still going to expect an education. And so if we get too focused on what the politicians are doing wrong, we won't do our job. And the fact is that even under these adverse conditions, suboptimal conditions, we can and must do our job. And our job is to educate the students that come to us. Now I know, I've seen the data, 75% of the students that come to you basically have to repeat high school. That's what data shows in CUNY. Because even with rising test scores in New York City, we know there are lots of kids coming in who can't write, who have trouble doing the math, and therefore they are spending that first year often repeating high school, which is another sign to Bloomberg, guess what? A lot of your reforms haven't worked, so don't celebrate rising graduation rates if the diploma is still suspect. But the fact is they're still coming to us, and so the question I have to ask, well, how do we do that? What do we do? I say there's only two things we can do. We've got to help build the pipeline. Instead of just setting the standards, we have to go into schools and help them figure out how to address these needs. And some colleges and universities are doing just that. I was on the phone yesterday with Reverend Calvin Butts, president of SUNY Westbury. They're getting ready to start a school at Westbury, focused on science and math, because they believe if they want to get more students from underrepresented, disadvantaged backgrounds into those fields, they can't wait till college. They're going to have a 6 through 12 school right there on their campus, and they're not only going to engage faculty from the School of Education, they're going to get faculty from the sciences. Because who better to work with teachers on developing and engaging an innovative science curriculum than real scientists? I would say that every one of our campuses should have schools like that. I know some of you do. Now the question to ask is, are they any good? What does our data show? Who's involved? Are these models? Because we have to be as serious, as focused on creating that pipeline as our policymakers, and we can't wait for them to get it right. So I mean, we have to be much more deeply engaged. Hunter has sponsored, I think, a model residency program for teachers, showing us what we should have known a long time ago. The best teacher education doesn't happen at the college, it happens in the classroom with real kids. And that means that college professors have to be in schools with those kids, with their students, so we can see what they're facing. Because if the gap between what they learn at the college and what they experience in the classroom is too great, they will not be effective. We have to change the way in which we work with schools. And we have to stop waiting for the students to be ready for us. We actually have to be ready for them. Which means we have to actually have faculty who commit to excellence in teaching. Now, let me say something blasphemous here. Teaching and talking are not the same. You know the difference? Lecturing is talking. I can do, you see, I can do that, right? But this is not necessarily teaching. How would I know if I'm teaching? How do I know if I'm actually teaching? There's only one way to know. I actually have to ask my students, does this make any sense to you today? Do you understand what the hell I'm talking about here? Because teaching and learning are connected activities. In fact, they're the same activity. They're the same activity. And if there's no evidence of learning, there's no evidence of teaching. There's just talking going on. And I meet lots of faculty who think that their job is to cover the material. The student's job is to learn the material. They don't learn it, I fail them. No, your job is to make sure they learn the material. Your job is to have the ability to figure out, if they don't get it this way, can I try it another way? Many of our teachers expect our students to learn the way they teach. They can't do it, they say something's wrong with the student. Not that me, as the expert professional, might need to have a variety of strategies. And at some point, if all our bag of tricks, all our strategies aren't working, then we say, guess what, I need help in here. Because I've tried everything I know, everything I can, and this group of students is not getting it. Maybe they need one-on-one help. Maybe it's language. Maybe it's a learning disability. What else? If we're going to really increase our numbers, increase the retention rates, then we can approach it differently. and stop blaming our students. Because guess what? They're not going to change. In fact, they're going to become more diverse. Look at the census numbers. Fastest growing populations in this city and in the country are Latinos and Asians. We are in the middle of a demographic shift. There are already 9 states where those who are in the minority are now the majority. By 2041, the whole country will be there. The whole country. What are the implications for higher education? If we're going to be relevant, if we're going to be in business, then we have to educate the next generation. That's the question that we've got. Are we ready to educate the next generation? Not to blame the next generation, not to wish for that other I wish we had the Arthur students again. They were so good. This is the new generation. And I know, they got attitudes sometimes. I know that some of them, they really weren't ready for college. They don't even know they're supposed to come to class. You know, it's not easy. But then that's what we've got to focus on. We've got to strategize. Okay, how do we do it? How do we engage them? What support systems we need to put in place? Make sure that they get the social support and the academic support. We've got to shift the conversation away from blame and onto what we're going to do differently to get different outcomes. If we don't do that, won't we serve this generation of young people who so desperately need access to a quality education? We also will lose our relevance, lose our very reason for existence, and we will be susceptible to being cut and eliminated because we're not serving that historic mission. So there's an imperative on us to figure out how to do this work. It's a moral imperative, because I believe that when we succeed in educating this generation of young people coming to us, we actually play a very, very important role in creating a more just and democratic society. The future of America will be determined by what happens in its colleges, universities, and schools. It's that important. If you're concerned about the fact that we have over 2 million people in prison, over 2 million, more people than in any country in the world at any time in the history of the world, a greater percentage of our population is incarcerated. And we know that those we incarcerate are almost always those we fail to educate. Connection is very, very profound. We also know that if this society is going to remain viable economically, that we have to have young people with 21st century skills who can speak more than one language, who not only can pass tests, but who can think critically, who can reason, who can problem solve. We need to make sure that's showing up in our curriculum as well, because we can't produce young people who are ready for jobs that are becoming obsolete. Which means we have to constantly look at our curriculum and ask whether or not we're in the needs, whether or not we are in touch with the changes occurring around us in our economies. So I want to acknowledge this is a tall order. It's like a lot of work to do this. But this work is so critical to our future as a country. It's the reason why even now, with so many competing issues, we've got 2.5 wars going on, we've got economy in the doldrums, people losing their houses and their jobs, the president keeps coming back to education. He's speaking on it. He spoke about it in his inaugural, the last State of the Union address. Why? Because he reads the polls. The polls show the American people actually care about what's happening in their schools and have a lot of anxiety, a lot of concern, because we do get it that education is about our future. So as those of you who are the guardians of that future, who are on the front lines like me in trying to deliver that education, we've got to ask ourselves, are we doing what it takes? And if we're not, we've got to be willing to challenge each other. We've got to be willing to have the hard conversations on our campuses. We've got to be willing to look at the data and ask, what does the data suggest about what's working and what's not? Because we can't afford to accept status quo. Thank you for the time this afternoon. Thank you for the pleasure of being with you.